Hello and welcome to another episode of Brand Retro. Today on the podcast we have Gracie Clemens, who is the CEO and founder of SGC Marketing. And we were chatting a little bit as we started here, Grace, and I kind of want to pull on some of those strings. So tell me a little bit about your marketing firm and how you got started and how you operate this while you're on the move and in different countries and being so fluid and mobile.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me. I'm a marketing lead of 13 years. I studied originally at UMass Boston, transferred to Queen Mary in London and finished my degree there. Did my thesis on consumer psychology and marketing and the purpose of social media. Went right into B2B mobile marketing for an agency based in London. Built the entire social media presence, including an SEO blog from the ground up. And they were working with clients such as Cadbury, Oxfam, Carling, so really big names out there. I did a little bit of freelance in between that and my next role. Eventually, I left B2B marketing and went into B2C, which is really where my heart lies, for fashion marketing for an e-commerce brand called Silkfred. I was there for about 4 years, helped the company. We saw 5 times growth within those 4 years, really defined the tone of voice for the company, and pretty much wore every hat that you can possibly wear on a marketing team in those 4 years there. So I had a great time there. Then I went freelance in 2020, right before COVID hit. And I was picked up pretty right off the bat by a London-based agency, but hired to focus on XPrize. And XPrize is a nonprofit based in LA. They were one of my most largest clients to date, really, because during my time there, Elon Musk came on board, donated $100 million towards the largest incentivized prize in history to carbon removal project. And I oversaw the launch of that over all channels. Now I am focusing on e-commerce brands, digital marketing audits, and that is where SGC Marketing Agency was born. The agency specializes in implementing all of the actionable insights that I offer to your e-commerce brand through those audits. So I've worked with a ton of smaller e-commerce brands over the years. It's an industry that I really enjoy myself, along with nonprofits, but that really sums up where SGC Marketing came from. And it just aligns with my passion of I love doing audits, as cheesy as it sounds.
Yeah, I mean, as part of the audit process, is it your passion for digital advertising, digital marketing, or is it that problem solving component to it where you can help these guys move the needle? It might be stuff they've overlooked, or maybe it's just stuff they just didn't know how to do. What are your thoughts on that, and what drives you to want to do that?
The excitement for me lies in the results that I have found for brands that are almost surprising at times. So a great example that I would reference is for XPrize. When I came on board, the first thing I always do, whether it's freelance or full-time, is an audit. One of the findings that I proposed in my strategy was we've got to get back on Twitter. We've got to start using it. And we did that, re-strategized. Within 6 to 8 months, we saw an 870% increase in traffic from that channel. So it was an obvious win. Fast forward, Elon Musk comes on board, donates the $100 million towards this prize, and that ends up being the only channel we were able to communicate with him on. So that 870% became infinite. Now, had I not done the audit, sure, I would have had an inkling that Twitter was the right place to be, but the data really proved it and allowed me to push that strategy forward. That's one example. Another example is an audit I did for an e-commerce brand for emails. And I just said, look, like we know from Instagram that these colors and this kind of theme works for you. Let's implement that into your email marketing templates, re-strategize what themes you're putting out there, revenue up by 200% within the first 6 months. So the excitement for me lies in finding the data that you need to make those decisions, to feel confident about I'm going to rebrand XYZ and this is why. And then seeing that KPI, like that revenue is really, it's quite exciting to see.
How deep do you go? Like, I know for those who are listening, a traditional audit, a lot of people are going to I'm going to look at the last 90 days, the last 6 months. I'm going to really dig into what the current pattern or the cadence is, which I think tells part of the story, but depending on how much they know about that platform or what they're doing, it potentially doesn't tell the whole story. And then there's the layering in of something that you had mentioned is like the brand element, what colors excite people versus, like, I think there's a deeper part of the process. And I think you do that. But tell me about that and how you fill in some of those gaps to just look beyond what would be considered best practice.
Yeah, so really it's all starts with circumstantial, what the brand is, where their audience is, and then looking into each platform. So first I start by looking at where they're active, and then I start looking at what's actually working and where their audience is active most. I've seen cases where I've seen companies posting on 6 channels and we'll narrow it down to just 2. So really in terms of how I measure, it's got to be apples to oranges. All platforms are a little bit different. They don't translate apples to apples, right? So month to month, usually, if I'm offering a smaller startup brand an audit, I might actually even recommend, say, look, you can do a one-off audit, a one-time audit I'll do for you, where you can apply that to your strategy going for the full year. What I would recommend for smaller brands is a quarter to quarter basis, right? Because that's when you do your planning on a financial and a content standpoint. So quarter to quarter is really where you want to be. For larger companies, you're working with a lot more data, a lot more content. So you want to be doing week on week, month on month, really. You want to be doing month to be able to measure more there. It can be, you can dive, like there's no end to diving into it, right? You can go really deep. So I just dig as much as I can until I really just can't dig anymore, if that that kind of makes sense. But it really comes down to the size of the company as well.
And for some of it, correct me if I'm wrong, but for some of it, you got to see it in motion. You got to try it. Let's pick a path. Let's follow it. Let's reevaluate or calibrate after 60 to 90 days and figure out what's working and not working. I mean, I know there's good reference points and there's data you can react from. But when you're setting a new course and when you're setting to define something maybe you haven't done previously, you have to check in with yourself. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole point of doing these audits. It's never a one-off. It's always, okay, we're going to go forward. We're going to apply these things. We're going to test. And then we're going to come back. We're going to take the winners. And then we're going to retest those again. It's never, you're never not testing, right? Especially with emails. I think social, you can have a lot of fun with organic versus paid when it comes to testing.
Yeah. So how do you approach a brand that, let's just say they've gone stagnant to a degree? Let's say that maybe they at one point had a plan, they exercised it, maybe the cadence fell off and they just didn't keep up with it like they should. To bring somebody like you in to re-energize it, where do you start? Because the data essentially that you would be looking at is somewhat polluted, right? Because it hasn't been pushed the way that it should. And I could be wrong about that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you approach a situation like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I wouldn't use the word polluted. I would use the word polluted for anyone who's bought followers. Then they've definitely polluted their data. I would
Yeah,
look at
fair
it
enough.
like aged cheese, right? I would look at the old data, and I have done that before. What can we find from it? And you do find some stuff in the old data, but you just have to basically work with what you have and then compare that to competitor research, market research. And then you just have to test, right? I did an audit for somebody last week where they were doing great on social. And the next step to take it to the next level was we looked at the data, we put a few things together, but really until you test it, you're not going to have a strong answer there.
No, fair enough. And how important is it to you that when you're working with these guys that you inject their brand into this? What's the happy mix there? Because personally, I'm a brand guy. I think branding is like pseudo important. I think it's like the hidden ingredient in any recipe, but how do you balance that and teach that and make sure that's kind of included?
I mean, that's injected into every part of the audit. Like, you shouldn't be analyzing data, in my opinion, without considering the brand because it's part of the triangle, right? You have your audience, you have your objective and your goals, and the brand has to be part of that. So if that's not being included and considered in the audit, it's not being done right.
So let's dig into a little bit more about your background in that I think you've done a lot of different things over the course of your career. You've given me somewhat of a summary of that, but where does that come from? And is it a love for creative? Is it a love for, are you a kind of a numbers person? What kind of drove you to want to be this person who digs into this and kind of problem solves?
So if you look on my website at my about, it does say I didn't choose to be a marketer. Marketing chose me. Like, I took a couple years off of university, and when I went back, Had I not taken those 2 years off, digital marketing wouldn't have even been a major in my university. So,
Yeah.
like I always say, like timing was just perfect in that sense. And then, I just got offered all of these jobs throughout my career. Everyone it was just something that I was naturally good at. I've always been a creative at heart. I think that's why some marketing appeals to people that find themselves to be strategical yet creative, because you can do both of that. But for me, where I decided to really focus on data was just really when I realized the value of it. If you're a marketer and you're coming in at the B2B mobile marketing startup, they need to know, why should we pay you to do our social media? This was 10, 11 years ago. They needed the proof. So that's where I started, was trying to prove the value of my marketing. And I never stopped trying to prove it. I mean, luckily, a lot of people know the value now, but the data is really the proof that you need. And it's only really ever helped me to understand it.
So I have my own opinion on this, which I will share, but I'd like to hear yours first. Is that, how important do you think it is that, because you have a creative kind of foundation, how important is it to your process? Do you feel like it allows you to see things a little differently, or what are your thoughts?
The data in relation to the creativity, you mean? I mean, it takes away the subjective point of view. I think social media and content, and also being a copywriter, it's really hard to measure those things. And social content is subjective, it just is. And data helps me personally, and a lot of people, remove that subjective bias that we all have. I mean, show four people a picture, four people four pictures, and ask them for their favorite one. The only way to really know what the best photo is to look at the data.
I think the inverse of that is how I perceive it, is that I think when you're working in the data space, whether you're crunching numbers, you're running email campaigns, social media, whatever it is, I think sometimes the numbers can mislead you as well. And I think having a brand centric approach or a creative approach sometimes allows you to see the forest through the trees. And it allows you to develop a filter, so to speak, for that data. It's not that the data is necessarily wrong, but there's maybe some fringe elements that are not being considered in this. And I think when you have a creative background or a propensity to be creative, you're able to extract more out of that process.
Yeah. And what's coming to mind is how I view content batching, right? The whole idea of being strategic and having schedule, a plan, or a process. Like, we do all of these things to give ourselves the ability to have the time to be creative. So the reason I tell brands, have a content batching schedule, have a day you create all of your content, trickle it out. That doesn't mean you're not going to be creating content in real time. That means you're going to have the space to create content in real time. That means you're going to have the space to keep up with the trends. That's the same way that I look at data, right? Like, it's there to help you, but it's not the be under end all, right? You need the creativity to work together. Getting them to get to work together. It's the web design, the web development team, and the marketing team, like getting them all to work together.
So one of the things I found as I was preparing for this podcast and boning up on a few different things and questions that I'd like to ask you, I found some information in a video actually where you talk about the storytelling aspect of social media and how all that fits into your strategy. Tell me a little bit more about that. And if you want to tell the London dress story, however you want to take that, I found that to be fascinating because I completely agree. And just to set you up for this, like, we're big on branding. We think that's important, but I think we call it the brand retro mindset, and it's the story. Sometimes it's the nostalgia. There's like deeper meaning and threads behind some of these different things. And the more we can bring that to the surface as part of the marketing strategy and how we apply it to the tactical and how we apply it to maybe some of the things that seem like absolutes, I think the better off we are. And in those instances provides us that uniqueness and that differentiation from our competition. So I'm going to shut up. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy on that and how you work that into things, because I found that to be one of the more fascinating parts about your strategy.
I mean, I've got so many thoughts flooding around in my head here. It's such a great question. To fill everybody listening in, I would say the yellow dress story, I think, is the one you're talking about. My father went on a Euro trip in 1969. He bought this yellow dress from Aussie Clark for my mother, and she gave it to me 45 years later. I brought it back to London and had it photographed on the street that he bought it. You know, in that video, I say the best clothes you have are the ones that have a story. And I was just having this conversation last night with somebody. I also was on a panel all about storytelling. And something that I think is super interesting about storytelling right now is how it's really changed over the years. I mean, with TikTok, you've seen we have the Get Ready With Me. And I just watched somebody this morning saying how I want it to be shorter. I want it to be even shorter than we're doing it now, quicker, faster. So the way brands can tell stories has just changed so much. And it brings me back to my thesis, which I wrote in 2014. And my finding was what psychologically impacts us on social media, whether it's negative or positive, is whether or not the content we consume or the content we post has purpose. That's it. It was a 50-50 across all the boards. Purpose defines everything. And really, when you look at storytelling, that is the purpose. So as a brand, telling your story is really telling your purpose. And that's, I mean, I'm getting a little emotional now thinking about it, right? That's what humans are all about. We're about the history, the stories, the purpose. That's what it is.
What I totally agree with you, and what I found ironic in this whole thing, or fascinating to a degree, is that if you'd have just taken a picture in a yellow dress, wherever it was, London or whatever, it's just, okay, great picture. There's not a lot to unpack there. It's just, okay, whatever. It doesn't make it more or less than what it was. But you add that story in there. You tell the kind of this journey of the dress. And then there's this personal side that my dad bought it for my mom in 1969. Okay, well, that's another completely different game-changing layer. And then, okay, then you took the dress from here to here. Like, what? Now it's a completely different experience. And it's the same dress. It's just a photo. If you want to break it down, it is what it is. But then you add these layers, and now all of a sudden it's a lot bigger deal. It's a lot more complex. It's a lot more emotional. It's a lot more strategically just valuable. Like, it's super cool. And it's a great example of how that stuff works. And I think we all have that ability. We all have those stories. We all have these build-up moments, these backgrounds, these associations. And the more we can extract those and bake those into our marketing, I just think it adds a completely different layer that most people would miss if you'd not shared it. Does that make sense?
100%. It gives meaning. And honestly, when it comes down to it, I think as humans, we need meaning and we need purpose. And in a capitalist world, I think we've seen it more and more as people that are constantly being sold to. All right, if you're going to bombard me with ads, give them some meaning. Give me something.
And I personally, I know I would get some real technical geeks they'd fight me on this. But I think it's also the algorithm buster. I think it's how you slip through the cracks. It's how if you're really trying to find your way around the boundaries of platforms and their algorithms and what they allow you to do and not do, bake in that storytelling piece, because they can't account for that. They don't know how to stop that necessarily. So there's a uniqueness there that's almost, it's hard to control. And I think it's important. I think all brands should dig deep and find that part of themselves. And it needs to be authentic, but we all have something. We all have a story. We all have a build-up. We all have a background. To me, it's just a paramount piece of the whole piece. So with that, tell us more about where they can find information about you, the work you do, the agency, how they can follow along.
Yeah, sure. So you can go to gracieclemens.com. That's with an IE. And you can head right there to book an audit. I've got a blog. I've got all sorts of stuff you can check out there. But right now, specifically, the audits are there ready to go. I would say give me a follow on LinkedIn, because the agency website will be landing in the next couple of months. Getting super excited about launching it and getting everything ready to go. But yeah, that's where I would say head on over there to check me out, gracieclemens.com and LinkedIn.
Yeah. Congratulations on your journey, Gracie, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun.
If you'd like to learn more about CyberDogs, share your thoughts, or even ask a specific question about this episode and or the brand retro mindset, contact me directly at mike@cyberdogsmarketing.com.